Welcome. I'm Jim Ferris, the director of the Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy at the USC Saul Price School of Public Policy. We have observed a heightened awareness and a greater urgency to address the inequities laid bare in recent years. This has highlighted the work of leaders on the front lines for social change. Leading Boldly, the USC Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy's new series focuses on emerging leaders who are working on an array of issues and varying approaches to create a more equitable society. We highlight 4 remarkable individuals whose life experience give them inspiration and strength. They share their personal stories, reflect on their leadership journeys, and offer lessons to kindred spirits and those who support them. Fred Ali, the former president and the CEO of the Weingart Foundation in Los Angeles, who has himself spent years advancing equity through his work in the nonprofit sector, engages these bold leaders in conversation. Fred then concludes with some reflections and observations for philanthropy. We here at the Center believe that the next frontier for social impact is bold leadership. And it is important to recognize that such leadership comes from all quarters, especially from unsuspecting places. Philanthropy can play an important role by encouraging bold action for change and investing in emerging leaders. Let me introduce my colleague, Fred Ali.
My interview partner today is Greisa Martinez Rosas. Greisa, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for
I've
having
been really
me.
looking forward to this interview.
Me too.
I want to give our audience a bit of an introduction. So in 2020, you were named the executive director of United We Dream, the largest youth-led immigrant network in the country. If I have the history right, born in Mexico.
That's right, yeah.
And at a very young age, you immigrated undocumented to the United States with your mother and father and 3 younger sisters. Grew up in Dallas, Texas.
Yes, Texas.
And moving a little bit farther along in your life, I understand that in high school and in college, you got very involved in activism, social activism, immigrant rights work. And eventually after college, went to work for United We Dream. We're in a variety of different positions there, advocacy positions, civic engagement positions, and then eventually became the deputy director of the organization and ultimately were named as its executive director. So evoking the words of John Lewis, you have been engaged in some good troublemaking for quite some time. And that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here with you.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about the work of United We Dream, how it's organized, the work itself?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, United We Dream is the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. My people are like young, we are queer, we are really clear that we are doing this work on behalf of millions of undocumented folks in the US. And we do this, as we call it, our secret sauce by doing advocacy, we do narrative change, and at the core of what we do is grassroots organizing. And for us, that means ensuring that we're creating a community for young people that where they can come into their own, where we can do political education, where we can dream about the world that we want to see for ourselves. It is really a place of transformation. So we have about 1.2 million members all across the country with more than 112 affiliates. And we are made up of, as I shared with you, vibrant, beautiful, energetic young people all across the U.S.
Wow, so a big, complex network spread out all across the country.
Just a little bit.
So it's a big job, and we're going to come back to that job in a little bit. But before we do, when I do these interviews, Grace, I always like to explore what brought people to the work in the first place. Where did the motivation come from? And as I've been joking with you, I've been stalking you over the last couple of months, listening to all your videos and reading some of the things that you've written and talking to people who work with you. And my sense is, Greisa, that you are motivated by maybe something that's greater than the work itself. And so I'm interested in knowing maybe where does that motivation come from? What gets you up more than anything else in the world? What drives you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, to know me and to know a little bit about my motivation, you have to know my people. And part of that is my mother. Her name was Elia Rosas. She was like my first teacher, my first organizer. She's the woman that taught me right from wrong. And when we first decided to come to the U.S. and they made the heroic decision to cross the Rio Grande waters, I was 7 years old. And I remember sometimes when I think back at it, how cold the water felt in my skin and how difficult of a decision it might have been or must have been for my parents to decide to take such a treacherous journey to come. And when I think about why I do this work, I often think about, when I tell the story to folks, I skip ahead and say, oh, we crossed the Rio Grande waters and it was scary and it was a long journey and we made it to the other side and we made it to the other side to grow up and make our home in Dallas, Texas. But what usually I skip over is that as we were walking through the icy waters, there was a moment where my mother lost her footing and she slipped into the currents. And all I could think about was like how scary it was and how I could lose my mother in that moment. And so my father, in an effort to help her, he put me on a rock and he went and ensured that she was okay. And I just remember feeling really scared and hanging on to that rock for dear life and having to make a decision about what is the next pathway forward. And I remember I had to take a deep breath, and I was with my younger sister, my Jokabet, and I was like, I can't stay here. We have to make it to the other side. And I just took a deep breath in and I took a step, wanting to be thoughtful and to honor the dreams of my mom and my dad that had taken this decision. And ultimately, my dad was able to help my mom get her footing again. And we joined hands and we made it to the other side. But I often think about in this work moments on the rock, moments where it is difficult to know what the pathway forward looks like for you and for your family. It's moments that are full of bewilderment and concern and fear. But that all of us within us have, in some ways, experienced these moments. And so for me, the grounding of this work is, in the beginning, it was about doing my parents proud. Like any immigrant kid, I wanted to honor that sacrifice. I wanted to honor that moment on the rock for myself. And then as soon as I came into this work, I felt that what guided me in that moment, what made me understand that I needed to take a deep breath and move forward, was also this deep belief and deep discipline of hope, that there was going to be something on the other side of that river. And so for me, that's what grounds my work, is that I believe that there's something on the other side of millions of deportations of people. There's something on the other side of the killings of Black men and Black women in these streets. There's something on the other side of the way that our planet is shifting. And my job is to get us closer to the other side.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. It's so this idea that despite obstacles, you still want to move forward, and you do that with hope.
Yeah, the discipline.
The discipline of hope. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to come back to that in a minute, but I also realize that you're the daughter of a pastor.
Oh, yes.
And your father was a pastor, so I'm curious, because I must tell you, Grace, you and I have gotten a chance to know each other.
Yeah.
I have felt this maybe spiritual component connected to your work, and so I'm wondering, did your father, being a pastor, have any influence on you? Does that show up in your work in any way?
Well, I mean, once a PK, always a PK. A pastor's kid, right. That marks you for life. Yeah, I think that part of the way that I show up in this work is really around having a deep faith. Faith in people, faith in the goodness of the universe that surrounds us. And, I don't know if I could do this work without that. I remember both in like the broader sense of believing that there's something bigger than myself, being something that grounds me, but also just like the mechanics of organizing. Growing up in Dallas, my dad was, he would plant churches for the Southern Baptist Convention, and we would have to go to the nearby park and pass out flyers and like ask people for to join our meetings. And so it's just like the basics of like one-on-ones and follow-ups and bringing people together it's marked me. But I do believe that this work of organizing is part of a prayer that I have for myself, for others, for my community. And it is, I think, part of my spiritual practice.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it's interesting, the idea of watching your father as a pastor organizing, and you took that with you.
Yeah.
And so thanks for that. So I want to go back to this. You talked about maybe having obstacles in your way at times, but you kept forward looking, the discipline of hope. So, I heard you once describe yourself as undocumented but unafraid, queer but unashamed.
That's right.
And when I heard you say that, Greisa, I thought about a quote that's always inspired me from Booker T. Washington, where he talks about that it's not always about the position you attain in life, but it's about how you overcome the obstacles getting to success.
That's right.
And so I'm wondering, you've had to deal with a number of challenges in a relatively young life. You've had a number of obstacles that have been thrown in your way, and yet you've kept going. So can you talk about maybe what some of those challenges were, and how you think you overcame them, and how it shows up again in your work as a leader now?
Well, I think that part of the way that we show up in this work is really by drawing power from moments where we felt the most powerless. And that is, part of at United We Dream, we believe that people closest to the pain are also closest to the solutions, the innovations, and the breakthroughs. And so when I think about that, I think about how, in the initial stages at United We Dream was in the aftermath of my father's deportation. He was detained while driving to work in Farmers Branch, which is a city in Dallas that was in the middle of a national conversation of its collaboration with ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's the largest law enforcement in the country with billions of dollars in its budget, whose sole goal is to detain and deport undocumented people. And he was put in jail, and in a matter of weeks, he was deported. It didn't matter that he was a Southern Baptist preacher. All of these things that we were taught were this American dream, that he was a homeowner, that he was the father of U.S. citizens. None of that protected him. None of that protected our family from being destroyed in a matter of weeks. And I felt hopeless. I felt like that this dream that I had bought into, that I had like swam across waters for, was like crashing just before me. And I felt so compelled and so powerless. Like I couldn't do anything to keep my family together. But then I found United We Dream, and they taught me about deportation defense cases and how we ourselves, our community, could like organize around a family and like ensure that they didn't go through that process alone, just like my family had. And it's what made me fall in love with this place, this idea that you can make impossible things possible. And I feel part of what caused me to continue to do this work is, in the beginning, it was the fear of deportation, of being detained. Like the thing that had, like that was the most frightening had happened to my family, and we'd survived. But as I've continued on my journey, I feel like part of, in the beginning, it was really about citizenship. It was about how we get papers so that doesn't happen. But as I've come to grow alongside and learn from leaders in the movement for Black lives, I've often asked myself, what does citizenship do for an Eric Gardner in the streets? What does citizenship do for the young people that are like being killed all across the U.S.? And in this moment, I felt it in my own life. My mother passed away 4 years ago. She was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And there is no denying, Fred, that if she had had a Social Security number, if she was not a Mexican immigrant, if she was not living in the red state of Texas, that she may have had more tools to be able to fight this cancer. That's undeniable. We see it in the research, we see it in the data, and I saw it in my own life. And so part of what grounds me in this moment is not just the moments of strife, as you mentioned, but it's actually the moments after that, the ones where I found United We Dream, the moments where after my mother passed away, many people surrounded me and put their arms around me. And that is because I wasn't alone. That was because I had the courage to say out loud that I was undocumented, unafraid, queer, and unashamed. And that brought more people around me. And so that's the beauty of organizing, that we're not promising anyone green cards or papers. We're not promising anyone that just by organizing your whole life is going to be solved. But we are promising that you don't have to move through that alone, and you don't have to move through that without any power. And that's what we do at United We Dream every day.
Greisa, thank you for sharing that. I've always thought that the mark of a really good, effective leader is someone who's able to reflect on challenges and how they overcame those challenges, at times allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And I've always seen you being that person. So thank you very, very much for that, Greisa. I want to drift a little bit more now into the work itself.
Okay.
And so now you're the executive director of this big, complex organization. But for so many years, you were on the front lines. And, people like Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative talk about the importance of being proximate to the work, to being connected to the work in some really deep way. So are you able to stay proximate, connected to the work in the way that you want to now as the executive director? And how important do you think that is for someone in a role like yours?
But I think I take Stevenson's proximate in like two different ways. The first one is around this idea that those most directly impacted are closest to the solutions, the innovations, and the breakthroughs. And that's part of what I feel like I bring into this role, that I know what it feels like to have your electricity cut in your house because your parents just didn't have enough money to pay. I know what it feels like to be detained by Border Patrol in the southern border and almost deported by CBP. And that makes me, with the other gifts and capacities that I have, makes me the best prepared to, in this moment, represent millions of people and spaces. And the second one, in terms of proximity, I think people talk about like, well, now you're not doing the one-on-ones and like the organizing, and that's the place where I actually feel like it's a bit limiting of the idea of what organizing is. There is the art and the craft and the science of grassroots organizing and bringing people together. But when I think about fundraising, I think about we're organizing foundations and funders. When I think about our advocacy work, we're organizing members of Congress. So I get to be in some of that space. But, ultimately, at United We Dream, we're such a young organization relatively to a lot of the folks that are around us. And we're deciding for ourselves what the shape of the executive director role is. For us, it's not really about titles, but it is about being accountable to the communities that we represent. It's about ensuring that we're not building an institution or an organization for the sake of that, but it's actually for ensuring that we're delivering real, lasting change in people's lives. And so part of that is doing my job well.
Yeah, right. Well, I really appreciate the answer. I think that we don't pay enough attention when we talk about leadership principles and how the principles of organizing oftentimes lead to really excellent leadership. And so I really appreciate your answer. And I must also tell you that as I've talked to people about the work you're doing with United We Dream, they have great admiration for how close you have stayed to your base. So that's not surprisingly, given your background. So I want to now talk about your role as the executive director. United We Dream, it's a national network. What'd you say, 1.2 million members?
Right.
I think you have 25 different organizational hubs across the country.
Right.
So how do you see your role as an executive director within that network? And do you see yourself as more of a movement leader or an organizational leader, or maybe some combination of both?
Actually, I get this question often, both from myself and others around me. I believe that an organization is not the movement. The movement is something that's not tangible. It's something that has its energy of its own. Part of that is what we saw last summer with the Defense for Black Lives and the millions of people that came out in defense of immigrants as well in the last couple of years. And those things, you can't really prime, but what you can do is ensure that you're creating infrastructure to move in that moment and to really express it. And so I see myself as both someone that is responsible for being able to build a vehicle that is accountable to movement. And that's where I see my organizational role of keeping United We Dream vibrant and going and steady and growing in the ways that our membership sees fit. But the movement is something that I'm married to and committed to for the rest of my life. It's being able to have a teacher. Her name is Helen Kim. And her teacher, Norma Wong, often talks about the long arc, this idea that all of us are in this long arc of movement that is 7 generations before us and 7 generations after us. And that our job is to ensure that we're creating the conditions for the 7 generations after us to be able to survive, and that we're not doing this work where one of us stands, 10,000 stand, because many people have laid the groundwork for us. So I see myself as an elder. I see myself as an ancestor, someone that is going to be held to account for how I made this work better and left this world better for the people to come.
So, Greisa, you have not been shy about using your voice. Prior to becoming executive director, and now certainly as executive director, and you've been pretty clear about expressing disappointment in maybe the Biden administration not rolling back a number of the Trump-era policies that maybe people hoped for, some disappointment about some of the campaign promises not being acted upon. So that's, it's oftentimes tough to use your voice in a situation like that, but sometimes important. So where do you think we are in this country with the immigrant rights movement? And are we making progress? Do you continue to be hopeful?
Absolutely. Hope is a discipline, and I'm definitely exercising it at this moment. At UWD, we believe that we do not owe ourselves to the Democrats. We do not owe ourselves to the Republicans. We owe ourselves to our families, to the people that risked it all so that we could have a chance to have it all. And that goes for any person that is sitting in the White House. At the end of the day, we just lived through 4 years of a fascist administration. And that is not a hyperbole. We saw the way that our children were being put in cages. We saw the way that Black people were laid to drink poison water. In Michigan, we saw the way in which indigenous communities continue to be, the treaties continue to be unmet. And this administration made a promise to millions of people. And the beauty of our movement is that we electrolyzed a movement moment where we made the impossible possible. Many people didn't believe that Donald Trump could be unseated. Many people thought that it was like a wayward dream. But because of grassroots organizing, because of Black women in Georgia, because of young brown kids in Arizona, we were able to get rid of Trump in the White House. And the most basic request that we had in exchange for saving our democracy from someone like Donald Trump was dignity for our people to be released from jail and detention centers, for us to be able to have clean water, for us to be able to be released from the shackles of student debt that we have been put upon by people that are gaining money and profit from our own from the own crippling debt that millions of people are living in the U.S. And so, of course, I'm disappointed. Of course, my role is to make sure that we're like speaking that out loud and we are not mincing words, because this is not a moment. We're in a unique moment in American history where the far right is using immigrants and immigration as a target. They are using it to be able to build power for themselves. And we see the impact that that's having on immigrants. I'm sure some of us heard about the stories of women being forcibly sterilized in detention centers. We see the images of Haitian immigrants being whipped by our own agents in the border. This administration's response was inadequate. And in a moment where, Fred, millions of people are following the Build Back Better plan here in Washington, D.C., that promise breakthroughs on climate justice, that promise breakthroughs on ending child poverty, on citizenship for millions of undocumented people. And the fact that we're not moving forward with that at that moment is an indicator of a broken democracy. That Republicans have refused over and over again to legislate because they are betrothed to Donald Trump and his vision of this country. That some Democrats stood in the way of progress for millions of people. And that, at this moment, we are at the brink of a war at a global scale. A war where most likely Black and brown people will be at the center of it and will continue to be. And so I think this moment calls for truth tellers. This moment calls for light bearers. This moment calls for people that are not only willing to bridge a divide, but rather win the argument that this country belongs to Black lives, that this country belongs to immigrants, that this country belongs to women's own right to choose whatever we want to do with our bodies, that this country belongs to trans people, and that no governor in this union has the ability to say that a trans kid is being abused by their parents. That just came out of Texas yesterday. And so our vision is one where all of us belong. Our vision is one where all of us are able to go home to our families. And I will always speak out. The members of United We Dream will always speak out to ensure that that's so.
Well, Greisa, thank you for your willingness to speak that truth. And we're very fortunate to have your voice in this fight. So thank you very, very much for that. So I want to talk now a little bit more specifically about you becoming the executive director. You're in, I think, a year and a half now.
Yes.
And yesterday when we had lunch, you said, does that qualify me as still being a new executive director? And I said, I think the dividing line is a year. But you're still relatively new in this journey and doing a great job, of course. But what have you found to be the hardest aspects of this job? What's been most difficult? And maybe what training or support experience do you wish you would have had prior to coming into the job?
as someone that has helped build United We Dream, that has seen it in the various stages that we've been in, what's difficult is being able to like have like an eagle eye rather than being in the weeds. I think part of it is also this unique moment that we just talked about. We're not immigrant young people. Some people call us dreamers. We enjoy a broad-based support. About 90% of Americans support immigrant young people's ability to move through a pathway to citizenship. The majority of the Latino and immigrant community see us as a trusted political voice, as a trusted truth teller in poll after poll. Republicans, Trump supporters, when they polled around our own pathway to citizenship, are largely supportive. So we have a unique voice in this moment in our history to be able to articulate what a pathway forward is. And so the challenge is not so much, like I told you about the budgets and about all this stuff. It's been an interesting ride, but I have coaches and people surrounding me, and I can get that. But the challenge of this moment is being able to have a good balance between how do you build and strengthen an institution while this moment calls for a lot more than that. It calls for revolutionary thoughts and ideas that are able to move us forward. And so that's been a challenging part. And the second one is to say is that, my parents never understood what I did for a living. They were like, oh, I think she lives in Washington, D.C. and like she works with Barack Obama, which is not the case. So it's been, finding and building community with people that understand what this responsibility feels like. And so that's been part of the learning. But the thing that I'm excited about is that I get to do this job that I love, that I get to be here on behalf of the people that I am accountable to for life, that I get to meet people like you and share what I've learned as I learn from others. So that's a bit of how I'm doing. I'll say though that like a year and a half is like, you can't tell me I'm not an ED. Like I feel like I'm going to stretch it to 2 years. It's funny, but it's also true. Like I think that at United We Dream, we've taken this like long-term approach that transitions are a part of life, and they also take longer than sometimes we all prepare for. We kind of have this cultural thing of like, okay, now you have a new job, go get it, and like you'll figure it out, right? But I think that in order for people that are most directly impacted, for Black and Brown people, for immigrants to take on positions of relative power, we have to ensure that they're supported throughout the time and not, not pull hard and fast rules of a year after that. You can't call yourself a new one. I'm just joshing you. But
well, no, I mean, your leadership is a journey.
Yes, that's right.
And in some respects, I was in a CEO role for many years, and I always thought that it was a constant journey. You're always learning new things. You're always being confronted with new challenges. And what I hear you talking about, which is so inspiring, is that you're clearly motivated to do this work for some reasons that you've already articulated, and you've made commitments in the things that you want to accomplish in your life. And that leads to this, what you just said, you love the job. And if you love the job, then it makes things a little bit easier, despite how difficult and challenging this work can be. So staying with the leadership journey, are there things in the past that you think helped you more than other things in terms of honing your leadership skills? Can you think of specific examples, or maybe it was training, maybe it was support, maybe it was coaching, but things that you think really helped?
Well, at United We Dream, we define leadership as like taking responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose in the face of uncertainty. And, part of the things that shaped me to say yes to taking on different responsibilities along the way has been, just the trainings of, I remember there was a training institute, the New Organizing Institute when I first started off, but really it has been like mentors and people that have poured into me that supported me across the way. And, when I was a new organizer, people like Alex Gomez that supported my tantrums as a new organizer on the ground that thought I knew everything and she couldn't tell me anything. People like Cristina Jimenez, who's the outgoing executive director, that saw something in me and ensured that like we were building practices and disciplines together. And it is also like this community in, I would say like early 2010s, there was a group of us that came together called the Freedom Side, which is a group of like young Black and brown organizers that came together from all across the country. And we ensured that there was a community feeling. And so all throughout our time together, we've been following one another through our careers. And it's been great to connect with people, to feel like there's someone that knows you or that's rooting for you that's outside of your role. And honestly, I think it has been like some interventions by philanthropy. Like our partner said, Unbound Philanthropy was the first one that took a chance on United We Dream and ensured that Cristina, that myself, and many others had access and understood sort of like what it was like to build this organization from the ground up. So I've benefited from, honestly, a lot of women of color that have like surrounded me and like loved me at the most difficult times, and also pushed me when I needed to be pushed.
Have you defined for yourself your management or leadership style? We talked a little bit about this at lunch yesterday.
Yeah. I was in this project called the Rockwood Leadership Institute, and they do, one of those like leadership like surveys thing. And mine was something like the counselor. And I had like this like whole epiphany and conversation with my therapist right afterwards. Like, I don't know what this means. Like, so I feel like the way that I have decided to step into my leadership has been to be one, kind, and to undo, I think, this idea that is really a white supremacist and patriarchal idea of a leader that takes up so much space and that like is able to be like dictating sort of like the pathway forward and be myself, which means being decisive when I need to be, being clear and getting opinions from those that I trust the most as we move forward, and ensuring that I'm not feeling like everything is on me, because it's not. I am accountable to millions of people. There are, like, United We Dream is guided by our National Leadership Committee, which is our members. So I run a membership-led organization, and I benefit from getting their counsel and their direction on how to move forward. So I think my leadership style is I think it's a journey. Yep. And it's, as we were saying, situational. It's whatever is required of me at the time, and whatever feels right at the moment.
And what I also hear you saying, Greisa, is that it's also, once you become that leader, creating systems and structures that deal with old systems of oppression that have characterized so many organizations over the past. So really appreciate your insight there. You mentioned philanthropy a minute ago, and I want to go back to the question of philanthropy.
Okay.
One of the reasons we put together this series is because we wanted to use it as an opportunity to encourage philanthropy to invest in organizations like United We Dream, and more specifically, bold leaders like yourself. So I want to dig into this question a little bit with you.
Sure.
And so you've had a lot of experience in working with foundations. Let's talk about foundations first. And I know they provide a lot of support for United We Dream. So I appreciate your willingness to talk about this question. So when have you found philanthropy in your experience to be most helpful to you as a leader, to your organization? And if you're willing to talk about it, maybe when they haven't been so helpful.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I'll say when they've been the most helpful, there are two examples. The first one is around just looking at their investment in organizations from a very visionary and flexible way. I think that, and trusting. I know that we talked about how important it is for foundations to grant money that allows the organizations to decide what they need to do to be most successful. And
so the unrestricted dollars.
Unrestricted,
yeah, exactly.
multi-year resources. I think it's when philanthropy does that, it not only obviously it's better for the books, it's better for the fundraiser, but it's actually like a vote of confidence that you trust the members and the leadership of that organization to make the best decisions. And, when we think about ultimately philanthropy is the way in which capital is being redistributed to those that help create it. I think that it feels honorable and dignified to ensure that those resources are coming to people with trust. I think the second one is what I, have really benefited from the most, which is when philanthropy brings people together without any expectations. I shared with you the Solidarity Summit that OSF and the Ford Foundation and many others sort of brought together a couple of years ago, where organizers from all across the country came together to just build relationships and figure out how we can be in solidarity with one another. And, is where I met Rashida Tlaib, that ultimately became to be one of a firebrand in Congress. I met Ahmad, who is running an organization that's fighting for the freedom of Palestinians. I met many people that are now leading the movement for Black lives. And so I think for me, it was such a transformational moment to see that philanthropy could use its power and its platform to bring people together, not because, we were taking on this project together or because we were funded to, we were kind of forced to, but because we wanted to learn from one another. And I just feel like that's a magical step that has shaped me and United We Dream in various ways. I think the challenge comes when there is a imposed upon frameworks, particularly about how we do our work. So at United We Dream, there's 70% of us are queer, 70% of us are women. But sometimes when philanthropy looks at an organization like United We Dream, because we are led by immigrants and have an expressed immigrant mission, then people sort of silo us into an immigration portfolio. And I think that's, I can understand it. There's I'm sure there's some background stuff, but it is actually continues to perpetuate a siloing across our movement when in this moment, what I know to be true and what is clear is that immigrant rights is a racial justice issue.
Right.
The reason why it's been 35 years since this country has passed any type of protection for undocumented folks is that most of us are Black and brown. Most of us are low-wage workers. And the idea that we can do our work from only a siloed and not speak on economic justice, on racial justice, on our queer liberation, I think it puts us in a juxtaposition that is not helpful for ensuring that we're creating the conditions for us to move together as a movement. So I think that's one way in which I think philanthropy could and I already see so many ways in which they're moving forward. For example, United We Dream has been working closely in building with the Sunrise Movement around climate change. And folks at Unbound Philanthropy have brought us together and wanting to learn about how we do this work together, and are exploring that option, the connection between climate migration and immigration here in the U.S. I think it's such an important way in which funders and foundations could keep at the leading edge of what is the future.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is part of it is the way the grant making is done.
Right.
Doing it in a way that trusts the leader, trusts the organization.
Right.
To do what's best for the organization and the people they represent. And certainly people talk about unrestricted funding as being a way you do that. But also going beyond the grant and using philanthropy's ability to convene others that enhances and supports your mission. So really, really very, very important. So now I want to ask you a question that I know you want to answer. And that is, if you look at the long arc of justice, given your background, your experience, how important do you think it is for philanthropy to be investing in the leadership of young people, preparing sort of the next generation of advocates and organizers?
Thank you for this question, because I really want to answer.
I knew you did.
I believe that young people are the catalyst to any change that this country or any country has seen. I believe that young people are also at the tip of the spear of driving dynamic and innovative strategies that actually deliver the goods for people. And I also believe, and I know, that young people continue to be those most impacted by the policies that have been enacted in the past. So we see this when we talk about student loan debt. We see this when we talk about the climate change and migration. Young people are going to hold the bag on this, and therefore they need to be supported to lead us into where the solutions and the innovations will come. I'll say that as we move forward, I think it's important to also think about young people, not just as the mobilizers on the street or the people that can knock on doors when it comes to election time. We have proven time and time again that young people are strategists, that we are able to move political and shape political landscapes. Just look at the Sunrise Movement and what they've done in building such an amazing political arm, and United We Dream ourselves, like being able to build our United We Dream Action and our PAC, because we know that independent political power is what's going to get us to the other side. So philanthropy, being able to do three things to support young people and our organizations. The first one is ensuring that we are supporting the organizations that are coming through the moment by grant making, but as well as like holding. For young people, not all of us remain as young looking as you do, Fred. So there's a lot of transitions. It's a normal part of like youth organizing to have new leadership, and philanthropy needs to be committed to the idea of youth organizing, not a specific leader, because we transition. The third thing I'll say is that every single time, report after report tells us that if any movement has a strong youth element to it, that is the likelihood that they will remain successful in actually reaching their goals. You see this most clearly within the immigrant justice movement. The immigrant justice movement of today pales in comparison to where we were 15 years ago. And I'll say that I'm proud that United We Dream has been a catalyst in changing who is representing us, how we build power moving forward, ensuring that people that are mostly directly impacted are actually making the decisions, not some white guy in the background, like putting young people in the front. You see this also with the climate justice movement, where Sunrise sort of like stepped into the stage, and people now we're hearing that it's like one of the most likely things to move forward in Congress. So I think that this moment is really about ensuring that young people institutional building is prioritized, so that could be part of our movement for years to come.
So philanthropy can help by supporting youth organizing. Philanthropy can help by ensuring that youth voice is lifted through the work of their grantees.
Right.
Really important. So thank you for that answer. I knew you wanted to answer that. So I have one final question for you.
Okay.
And although I have to tell you, Grace, I could sit for another 2 hours. I really enjoy talking with
Fred,
you. So,
same.
knowing, as I think you've said in different ways in the past, that the arc of justice doesn't always work well for everyone. What would Greisa today say to a young Greisa just starting out?
Young Greisa was really, she was really ashamed, really afraid of what was to come. I remember not even being able to plan past the age of 18. I just never allowed myself to think about the future in that way. And so if I were to have her in front of me, I would say, you're enough. You don't have to be anyone else but yourself, and trust yourself and your people that you're going to make it through. I think that many of us suffer and like carry a weight and a responsibility of doing right by the people that love us. We often ask ourselves if we're doing enough, if we are meant to be the ones doing this work. And if we sometimes, especially during this pandemic, people suffer from loneliness and a reflection of who is around us. And so I when I think about myself, I also think about our members in this moment where some of them, because of the pandemic, went to being like the heads of households, the only people that were making money in their families because all of their families were laid off. And so my message to the members of United We Dream is always that you are beautiful, that you belong in this place, that you are seen, that we are grateful that you're here, and that you matter, and that together we can make the change that will truly astonish the world. And we see this, Fred, this energy bubbling all across the country, where young people are saying yes to leading, where young people are ready to defy the challenges that are moving for us. And I often think about, there's a spiritual that says, like, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. We're gonna follow the water. Probably messed up the lyrics, but the sentiment of it is that we are not alone, that we are the children of people that have paid with blood, sweat, and tears for an opportunity to lead in this moment, that our crowns have been paid for, that none of us have anything to prove but to be ourselves in this moment. And that I believe that a coalition that is led by Black young people, that is led by Black queer young people, that we are going to ensure that this country actually meets the truths and the promises that my parents risked their lives crossing the Rio Grande waters. That we're going to meet our commitment to honor the dignity of Black people that have built this country. That we will say yes to the requests of Indigenous communities that are just wanting to lead and be seen. And that the women in this movement and in this country are able to just walk with dignity without any fear. And so we'll wade the waters, we'll walk, as you were saying, in making good trouble, and understanding that that's our responsibility moving forward.
Yeah. Well, Greisa, listen, thank you for that inspiration, and thank you just for being your wonderful true self throughout this discussion. It's been inspiring. I know people listening are learning a lot, and just thank you for all the work that you're doing, your commitment to such an important movement. So, thank you very, very much. It's been an honor.
Gracias, Fred.
As with all the leaders you will meet during this series, Grace's commitment to social justice was compelled by a series of life experiences, 7 years old, going from rock to rock, crossing the Rio Grande River, growing up in the South, undocumented and queer, watching her father deported, and then losing her mother who was unable to access the health care she desperately needed because of her immigration status. No longer, however, ashamed or afraid, Greisa has emerged as a strong and compassionate leader who has learned to draw power from the moments where she felt most powerless. And it's clear that the animating force behind Graisa's remarkable leadership journey is a closely held discipline of hope that she says makes the impossible things possible.
Greisa speaks about the importance of an intersectional approach that compels the development of diverse strategic alliances to resist race and gender oppressions. She also acknowledges the importance of leaning into your power and using your voice, being a truth teller, grounded in the principles of equity and justice. She also had clear and simple advice for philanthropy that you will find repeated by every leader I have interviewed in this series. Trust your grantees, allow leaders the chance to be bold, and use your convening power to bring people together for learning and inspiration. Most importantly, resist the temptation to impose your ideas and frameworks on people closest to the issues and therefore closest to the solutions. Greisa teaches us in a clear, humble, and inspiring manner that investing in emerging leaders like herself is our hope for a more equitable future. Visionary, strong leaders like Greisa are demonstrating every day that they are more than ready to lead. They have already emerged and are deserving of our support for their bold ideas advancing justice. What an honor it's been to be in conversation with such a wise, accomplished, and committed leader, still early in what will no doubt be a remarkable leadership journey.